Here we go. I've got another podcast tonight. I'm staying on the West Coast. This is Square Dance Callers Talking tonight from Los Angeles, California. I have a caller that's traveled internationally. He travels all over the United States, also really big in the Caller Lab. Tonight, I have the absolute pleasure, the absolute gratitude that he's doing this for me tonight. Mike Seastrom, how are you, sir?
Hey, I am good. It is so nice to be here and nice to talk a little bit about calling and square dancing. And so I'm enjoying it. I've seen some of your podcasts and I like what you're doing. And it's a great way for us to get out and increase the communication we all have.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So you're doing pretty well out there in Los Angeles?
I'm doing good. Tomorrow I celebrate my 4th anniversary with my wife, Lisa. And both of us have had spouses that had passed, and so it's nice to meet somebody in square dancing that you really connect with, and so I'm feeling blessed and can't complain at all, Charlie.
Well, congratulations on that. It is great when you can find somebody like that for sure, and you're already. And what I've talked to some callers in the past and dancers. It helps if you're already in the square dance calling business when you meet someone, because they don't have to get brought in cold. Hey, this is what I do. And they're like, so that you're good there. So that being said, how long have you been doing it? When did you start dancing?
Charlie, I started dancing in 1960. And so I was 9 years old. And what happened is I lost to my mother over a Rose Bowl game. And my family has always bet over football games around the New Year's time. And in the Rose Bowl game, it's always, back then it was the Pac-8 teams and the Big Ten teams. And anyway, I bet my mother, she always bet Big Ten, and I lost. And the deal was I had to try square dancing 3 times. And if I didn't like it after 3 times, no problem, we're good. She did the same thing to my father, and he became an avid square dancer. So both of my parents were avid square dancers at the time. Okay. They brought me and my sister, who's about a year older, to a class in a place in the San Fernando Valley here called McDonald's Barn. And the barn was a popular place, held about 25 squares, beautiful wood floor, looked like a barn, plenty of parking. Anyway, we went to this, and it was a kids class, and this class fed a exhibition group. And so the first night I was there, I had to dance with my sister, which was, I didn't really like dancing with my sister, and as a matter of fact, the first night I even tripped, fell, and got a bloody nose in the middle of the square.
Wow.
And okay. When you get a bloody nose, like, I used to have bloody nose. So I had to haul my nose into the bathroom, and that wasn't a great first night. And so I told my mother that it was kind of 0 for 1, but I had 2 more nights to go. So the second night was the same thing. I danced with my sister, and it wasn't all that great, but it was a little better. At least I didn't fall down and get a bloody nose square dancing.
Yeah.
The third night, a young gal came up to me and asked me to dance and said, "I've got a partner for your sister." And I said, "Yes." And this gal was, I'm about 9, 10 years old. This gal is like 14, 15. And I'm thinking, hey, this is pretty good. And this gal was my partner through class. I became an avid square dancer.
Very nice.
The girls were great. And like I say, this group fed an exhibition group. I was never good enough to be in the exhibition group, but I enjoyed square dancing. We later my folks formed a club for kids, and so I began to dance with that club, and I danced for a couple of years, and we had a graduation, and there was a young caller in our area by the name of Marlon Hull. And Marlon used to record on the USA label years ago, has retired as a caller. But I thought, if this guy could call, I could probably do this. And about the same time, my teacher in the 6th grade was teaching the Virginia Reel. And she was calling it a square dance. And I said, no, this is a contra dance. This is one line that's facing another line. There's no square here. This is not square dancing. And she said, oh yeah, it's square dancing. I said, no. And she said, well, smarty pants, teach us to square dance. So I borrowed a 45 record from the caller that called for our club, brought it back and flipped over the flip side on it. On the flip side column was a caller by the name of Bob Van Antwerp, who's in the Hall of Fame and was one of the original forming callers of Caller Lab, who later became my mentor. Anyway, I taught my class this flip side with Bob Van Antwerp calling. They loved it. The music was more modern. It was the movements were more, in today's dancing, And so I went and borrowed another record. And finally, the teacher said, "Why don't you turn those records over and call?" So I practiced and I kind of really enjoyed it enough to where I started buying some more records and calling singing calls. The instructor for our club helped me along and would bring me up. And patter at that time was more memorized or you read it. And of course, Sets in Order American Square Dance Society magazine at that time had always a column for choreography. So I learned off that choreography and I memorized a lot of my choreography. And, you put it kind of in your mind. There was a hash book at the time called J. King's mental image, burnt image, I think is what he called it. J. King was actually a mentor to Don Beck, who Don wrote Out of Sight. And so he was kind of the pioneer of that. So I began picturing the squares in my head but my patter was not all that great, being a young caller. Anyway, the long and the short is after about 4 or 5 months of calling and working at it, the caller that was calling for our club got sick. And his name was Bud Brugman. And Bud actually helped Pat Carnathan, another popular caller in this area, and record producer, helped him learn to call. Anyway, Bud got sick and said, "Would you take the class this next year for our club? And just call me. I'll tell you what to teach." Well, through the summer, I became an avid student in teaching and studied Sets in Order material and that kind of stuff. And so I started a class in September in 1963, and I had like 15 squares of kids. And here I'm like 12 years old, but I didn't have any equipment. So I went to my folks and I said, "Can I borrow the money to buy some equipment to call, and I'll pay you back?" And so they said, "Well, okay." So I got $15 every time I called. 1963, kids paying, I think 50 cents to get in the door. Anyway, the bottom line was that by the end of the class, I paid my folks back, and I learned a whole bunch of stuff about teaching and that started my calling. I taught a couple of classes for about the next 3 years until I got into high school. And then I got involved with football and baseball and sports and stuff. And I backed off teaching, but kept square dancing and kept calling for some of the local clubs around. And so that's kind of my beginning in calling anyway.
Okay, fantastic. And so from that point on, you just started having a club, and after you got past the teaching part of it and just took off from there?
Well, what happened was I had a club in high school. I formed a club in high school that danced on Wednesday nights, and a good number of the guys that were in that club were football players because I was playing football. And of course, one of them was the coach's son, and he was aggravated that his son was out, square dancing. And I told this coach, I said, because these guys are dancing and moving on their feet and balancing and moving around, I said, they're going to be better football players.
Sure, absolutely.
And he laughed at me. But at the end of the year, he turned to me and he said, I take it back. He said, all of our guards are big guys, and he named them off. He said, all those guys can pull and block. He said, between you and me, yeah, the dancing helped.
That's outstanding.
So, but at the end of high school, when I went into college, I stopped teaching. I went to college in New Mexico for about a year, and then went back to San Diego for about 2 years. And I didn't teach classes during that time because I was in college and stuff. And but I kept occasional dance dates for different clubs and called, and stayed with it all the way through dental school. When I finally got my doctorate in '76. By that time, I had met Bob Osgood and Bob Van Antwerp, who were big in our area, and they became my mentors. They really helped me along to get new equipment and teaching techniques and all that kind of thing. So then I started after I was out of dental school, and after I got my doctorate, then I started back teaching again and going to Collar Lab, and that kind of launched my career going forward.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I think one of my first memories of you was at Collar Lab. I think you either gave the keynote address. There was you did a big speech. I can't remember which one it was, but that was the first time I was like, hey, I need to find out more about this guy. And just watching you on YouTube, what I can find, and there's plenty of you on YouTube calling. So tell me about Collar Lab. You started off in it years ago, and so what's it for you?
I started in my first convention was 1977,
Okay.
and I was just in awe because all the people that were my heroes were basically at Collar Lab arguing and all that stuff. And the interesting story on that was you had to be invited back then. So
Wow.
Bob Osgood invited me to come. And I flew out with him and I flew back with him. And when I flew back, I was sitting in the plane talking to him, and he said, well, what's your impression of Collar Lab? And I said, I can't believe the amount of bickering going on over this call and that call and how you do this and how you do that, the number of beats. And he said, all of that has to be kind of worked out. And he said, everybody has their own opinion on it. But I said, going forward, I was concerned that the amount of respect that callers had for each other because of the arguments and stuff like that, I said, I just wish there was more respect with callers for each other.
Okay.
And he said to me something that still stays with me. He said, this is a young organization. In 77, 78, it was fairly young. And he said, I might not see it in my lifetime, but I think you'll see down the line the respect that is shown for each other. New callers, veteran callers, famous callers, whatever, you'll see that respect in your lifetime. And I think it was about 2005, 2006, I started seeing that kind of respect that callers had for each other that I still see. And one of the premier guys, Charlie, that brought that out was Marshall Flippo.
Okay.
Because Flippo, when you were a caller, didn't matter if you were brand new or if you only called singing calls or if you taught, whether you traveled, didn't matter what kind of caller. If you were a caller, you had his respect. And I think he taught, just by his actions, taught a lot of us that, boy, if you pick up a microphone and you're working at it, like I know you are, that respect belongs with us, and we need to respect each other and help each other in any way we can.
Yes, sir.
So, and I see that at Collar Lab now a lot more than I did back there. There's a free sharing of material and of teaching techniques, and I like that. That kind of energy is what is the fuel we need to fuel this amazing social activity that we have.
Agreed. I tell, when I talk to people, whether it be on my podcast or at Collar Lab or just when I'm talking to people around here that don't square dance in Atlanta, and because everybody at work knows what I do, and I get the jokes all the time. But a lot of people ask some serious questions, and I tell them, first of all, as a dancer, you can go to a square dance in most anywhere. Walk in, your wife sets her purse down in a chair. I don't know a single dancer there. Now I don't set my wallet down because it's in my pocket. But I can set my phone in a chair, go dance, come back. It's going to be right there, and the callers, and I'm sure there's some in every line of work. If you get enough people, you're going to have somebody who's not a nice guy or a nice lady.
Sure.
But as a group, I've been calling for about 11 years now, and actually doing it for about 10. No matter where I go, Collar Lab, a caller school, a state convention, and I meet somebody, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is Hunter Keller. I walk up, I'm like, hey, I'm Charlie Petrie, and he's like, hey man, what's going on? Where are you from? The nicest people in the world. I've had zero bad experiences. I know some people may have, but it's very few and far between. Is the best way to put that.
That's exactly it. It's that kind of respect, and even dancers, because of the nature of our dance. It's a team dance that has to have a cooperative effort with these 8 people to make it work. So you really have to interact with people in a cooperative way, but it's a bit of a sport. We have this image that we've been struggling with for years, square dancing. I mean, I call it team dancing. When I teach in schools, I call it team dancing. And people will ask me, well, isn't this like square dancing? I say it's a further evolution of our American dance.
Okay.
It really is. This team sport that we have is not only a further evolution of the visiting couple dance and all the stuff that went on before, but the social interaction in our activity, just because of the nature of the dance that we have with each other, is unlike any other social activity I know of. You could have people all walks of life, and you know that just hang together, have a great time. Hey, let's dance, square up, put your sets together. The caller has fun with the people and interact with people. I think we've got the best social activity, and people need those social connections.
Absolutely. No matter where I've gone in the United States, I haven't called out of the country or anything yet. Anywhere in the United States I've gone, if I walked in, didn't know a single soul, couldn't have felt more welcome.
Yep.
People walk in, hey, come get something to eat, come get something to drink with us, in between tips, what have you. So yeah, it's fantastic. Caller Lab has been huge for me too. I joined probably, I think 2012 or 13 is when I finally joined. So I started calling around 2012. So,
well,
all right.
It's interesting because the people that you meet in Caller Lab kind of connect you around the country as well as around the world.
Yep.
And, I was fortunate enough to do some traveling, to take groups to Sweden and Denmark and Norway. And some of my best memories in square dancing are taking groups. I went to New Zealand with a group of about 70 dancers. We took down there and toured all of New Zealand. Those kind of things that you get a chance to meet dancers from other countries and sit in the middle of their culture, unlike you would if you were just on a tour someplace or just visiting someplace.
Right.
I did the 3rd national convention in Sweden, and when I got there, I was coming through the front door in the convention, and one of the gals looked at me and she said, "I'm so tired of dancing to you." And I said, I just got here. And she had learned to dance from some of my tapes that I had sent to, I had a couple in my class that the husband had to leave after the 3rd week. So she would tape me on a cassette tape recorder, and she would send the tapes to her husband. Well, he was working on the oil projects in Saudi Arabia. And in Saudi Arabia, back in the 70s and the early 80s, the Americans and the Swedes hung together because there was some commonality in their language and culture. So this guy had a tape group of Swedes and Americans, and he taught these guys how to square dance from my tapes. And then they copied them and took them to Sweden. So this gal had learned from my tapes, and she was already tired of dancing to me.
That's fantastic. That is a great story. So you've already told one. You got any other funny stories out there? Anything that jumps out to you?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting. We took a group to New Zealand, and one of the favorite things that this tour group liked in New Zealand was ice cream, because the ice cream in New Zealand is unusual. It's their favorite flavor is hokey pokey, and it's a spun honey candy that they have in New Zealand that is kind of like English toffee. It's put in ice cream, and it's a great ice cream. They have banana ice cream with chocolate chips. And anyway, our group of about 2 busloads was, every time we'd stop someplace, we would stop at an ice cream place, and they would literally have to. We would have our bus driver phone ahead and let them know we were coming, so that if they had 70 people outside their ice cream store, they had somebody to scoop ice cream for us. But we were just crazy for the ice cream over there, and one of the clubs knew that I loved this ice cream, so they hooked up a tour, and we all went on a tour of the Tip Top Ice Cream Factory. So
that's awesome.
It was, and once again, dancers are that way. They'll help each other out. I've been to Japan over 20 times square dancing, and as you know, many of the Japanese callers learn to call from recordings of American callers for the
Okay.
enunciation and that kind of thing. And so it just so happened my records had gotten over there, and those callers were learning, and so they invited me to come over and call. So one of the seminars I have done over there several times is the phonetics of square dance calling,
Okay.
because in Japan they don't have like th sounds like through, so they consequently say through. Or so in teaching them how to say through, I got some of my dental pictures of mouths and lips and open, where you could actually show where in the mouth you got to make these sounds.
Okay.
And fortunately, with a translator over there, she said, "Well, listen, I can help you with this." So we got everybody a bottle of water, or a bottle of water there, and we had everybody gargle with the water first, just so that they felt the back of their throat. And then we had them go, ooh, ooh, feel that coming in the back of your throat, ooh. So then we had to get them to say T, like a. So I had to show them how to put their tongue on the top of their front teeth. And this is the dental part of the phonetics that comes.
Yeah.
Because we have to teach patients phonetics. And so, or reteach them phonetics when we make them new teeth. So that became a regular seminar over there for me. And many of their callers are just fine callers. So it's every time I go over there, I really just enjoy
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I was talking to Buddy Weaver, and he said that he was in Japan years ago, and he was with someone. I can't remember who the person was, but they were both calling. And he said as they were calling, the guy he was with kept saying, "Send her back Dixie style." And he said they had 15 squares, and it broke them down, and they couldn't figure out how. And so they got it corrected, and they're calling. And again, he said, "Send her back Dixie style," to a wave, and broke them down again. And after they were done, and Buddy said that after about 2 tips, they figured out they were doing centers Dixie style to a wave, because they didn't understand send her back, which is American made. Send her back Dixie style, because it's not part of the call, it's Dixie style.
Yes.
And so he was saying that, and that they were literally doing, the centers were doing a Dixie style. And he said, of course, he was like, "Let me see how you're going to get out of this." So
exactly.
So that's exactly where it is. Yep. Centers Dixie style.
And they understand boys and girls, not men and women. So if you say men run right, they don't catch that. But if you say boy run, they catch that. And so they're used to the boy girl. I once had the heads past the ocean, and all the men extend to the next girl. Well, they didn't get men. When I said all boys, I said all boys extend, and then boom, they had it. So there's certain things you learn. Any place you go, that language is something. So
yeah, well, like we were talking before we got on here recording, like Caller Lab, you're always going to learn something. Exactly. Every dance I go to, I've got my club dance I do every first and third Thursday. I'm calling tomorrow night, and I'll learn something. And granted, I'm new at it, but I'm going to pick up something when I'm out there, because I teach an hour before, we do a class before, and then we go into our dance. Right. And so I pick something up from that every time.
One of my favorite seminars is that I love to do is on teaching, because there's somebody in the audience, one of those callers, that has a little gem that they use and find it really works. And boy, you pick up stuff like that. Yep. You share that information, and you just get better and better at it. So
yes, sir. So your some of your recordings and tapes got you over to Japan and everything. That being said, how many records do you think you've recorded, songs?
Boy, Charlie, I started in 1978 with Wild West recordings, and I think I did a couple on there. I did a couple for Bob Bennett with Thunderbird, and then I went on to Circle D with Wade, and started with Wade. We actually did a festival together up in Asilomar, California, and it's actually a Square Dance Institute that started in 1951. Now, that's a long time ago, and when I got invited to be on that festival that week. It was with Bob Osgood, Bob Van Antwerp, and at first it was Melton Luttrell. And Melton, of course, is still going strong in his 90s in the Fort Worth area. And then John Jones joined, and then Wade Driver. And there was something about Wade that just clicked with Bob and his wife Becky and Van Antwerp. And anyway, so I got to know Wade. The interesting thing about Wade is that Wade, back in the time when I met him, would not eat anything green. And because if it was green, it was either rotten or it wasn't ripe yet. So consequently, he had a hard time finding anything to eat in this institute because they serve really healthy, nice food, you know.
Okay.
So there was many of those nights he and I would sneak out to McDonald's, or we'd go out because I had the car. We'd go out and hit 7-Eleven and have a microwave burrito or something like that because he couldn't eat anything.
Yeah. Okay.
So he same way with Japan. When we first went to Japan, Wade wouldn't eat the food, so we ended up going to McDonald's. Or at one time, he had a giant case of Snickers, and I think he lived for almost a week on Snicker bars.
Wow, in Japan eating Snicker bars.
Anyway, we've trained him. He eats the Japanese food now, and he's a great traveler over there.
That's awesome. So of all the songs you've done, and I know this is tough, and I get some of the guys that have been calling for a while, it takes them a minute. Favorite singing calls? Many as you want, 2 or 3. What do you think?
Well, one of the things that I enjoy doing when we do singing calls is put harmony tracks on them. Okay. And years ago, we had a couple years where we had Ozzy awards that were given for singing calls. And I won an Ozzy for the Sloop John B record that I did for Wade, because when I was recording it, just the vocal alone with the Beach Boys song just didn't sound right. So I added a second harmony vocal, and that didn't sound, just 2 Beach Boys. Well, there's a lot more of them, So I recorded a third track on there. And then I practiced some falsetto so I could do a falsetto track. And so I did So to me, when I call that one, I really enjoy calling it because it's a Beach Boys number, and I got all these vocals on there. Right. So I enjoy that. I enjoy singing or doing songs that have vocals on them. And that's one of them. So we just put out another one that's Kindly Keep It Country and Let Your Love Flow, that have harmony tracks.
Oh, okay. I love that song.
Yeah, they're great tunes. And I'm a little bit prejudiced, but Wade has produced some of the best music in square dancing.
Sure.
He's mentored some of the other labels that are the finest labels, Tony and Ted, and a lot of those guys, Jerry, a lot of those guys worked with Wade early on, and he's always been free with his information of what's the best way to put music together, what's the best way to put a song together, how you can arrange it. Mm-hmm. The singing calls, or the singing call schools that Ted and Tony are doing now, a lot of that comes from the textbook that Wade put together, because he is such a picky person about how you deliver a singing call to make it sound like the original song, and a stickler with trying to make that music sound like the original music.
Yeah, I noticed that when we started dancing, my wife and I, 29 years ago, and we like most, we went for about 6 or 7 years, and then our son hit grade school, middle school, and all that, and we quit dancing. Oh, yeah. And then when he graduated high school, we started back, and I saw a difference there because I started going to dances around 2010 is when we started back. Okay. And it was the same, not all the same, but the music was still the boom chuck and the banjos and fiddles, which I love, country music, sure. Bluegrass and all that. But it was stuff that I'd never heard before. And I was dancing one night, and the caller that up here in Atlanta where I'm at, he did Unwound, George Strait. And that was the first song that I said, wait, I know that. That's a real song. All of them are real songs, but that one to me, because I would probably listen to it the day before on the radio.
On the radio.
And I was like, what? And then about a year or so after that's when I started calling. And so then I was just like, you know what? And I stumbled onto the throwback and the Scott Bennett songs. And I was like, wow, this sounds exactly like the radio. And then I got into the Wave Driver and I started finding all the other labels. So music has made a huge turn from my point of view in the past few years. And it sounds like what you hear on the radio.
You know, we've come around a long way, and the a lot of the quality labels use live musicians. Some of these musicians are the finest musicians around. It used to be, you know, Wade's band originally was Clint Black's band, and
Okay.
they were in Houston, but Wade would have to wait till they got back into Houston to be able to record with them.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, you can have somebody that plays steel or fiddle that's touring with Reba McEntire or somebody else, and we can send a track to them. They can put their instrument on there and send it back, and boom, boom, we have the technology to put together a piece of music with some of the finest musicians around.
What a world when you can do something like that, you know. Just technology wise is amazing.
It's blessed. It's a blessing, and it's blessed us with some great music now.
All the places you've called, most memorable hall.
Most memorable hall. Boy, probably one of the most memorable halls. When I called in Sweden at the Third National there, they had a hall where when I walked in, they had these huge concert speakers on the back wall. And right up behind me, they had these huge concert speakers on the front wall. And I looked at that sound and I thought, boy, the sound is just going to crash on these dancers in there. But they had all the speakers on the back wall flipped just had flipped in phase. So literally, when the sound hit the dancers in the center of the floor, it just stopped right there.
Wow.
And it was a concert guy that put that on, and I asked him about it before I even started calling. I said, "Is this going to work?" And he said, "You wait." And it was the most amazing sound, and it was a huge hall. We had over 50 squares there dancing in their main hall, but it was the most amazing sound, and you could hear every place, and it was amazing. So that's probably has stuck with me over the years more than any other hall I've called in.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's great. You know, and stuff like that is few and far between sometimes, that kind of setup, because, you know, you walk in, usually you're in a community center or a senior home, and I'm not putting any of those places down. They're great to have.
Sure.
And you usually just either have your yak stack or whatever speaker system you use.
Right.
When you walk into something like that, I've been there. There's a couple in Tennessee that I've been to that they're dedicated dance halls, and they might be yak stacks, but they're mounted on the wall. So you walk in and just plug your mic in and your laptop or whatever, and you're like, oh man, this is like a real place, you know? It's not me just rolling in my stuff into a gym and setting it up real fast. So
it's really true.
That's great, something like that.
Two other halls that I want to bring up, and one of them was in Sweden. We had a group of dancers that toured Sweden, and we were in the facility where they give out the Nobel Peace Prize, and they have a Nobel Peace Prize ball. And that beautiful hall where they hold the ball for the Nobel Peace Prize is just the walls are lined with these gold inlay, you know, tiles. And it's a phenomenal place. And as we were touring through, and normally if I've got a group that I'm touring with, I'll have a boombox in a backpack with me. And I asked this gal, I said, could we dance in this hall? And she said, hold on. And she went back and she held the group up behind us. And she said, okay, you guys can start right now. So I pulled out my boombox. I just set it on the floor. The acoustics were so incredible. I didn't use a microphone, nothing. I just called to about 4 squares of my touring dancers that were there. And we danced in the hall where they do the Nobel Peace Prize ball. And it was, like I said, I didn't even need a microphone, Charlie. It just, the sound just was amazing in there. And I went back, because I went back again this last year. Wade and his wife Healy and my wife and I went back, and we just spent a week in Stockholm, because it's an amazing city on We were originally invited there to do a festival, and it got canceled during the pandemic, and we decided to go anyway. So we went, and so I got to see that hall again, and just kind of relive that memory, and that's why it kind of sticks in my head there a little bit. So it was fun. It was fun.
Fantastic. You got one more? You said you had two more?
Yeah, there was when we took a group to New Zealand, there is a cave in New Zealand where choruses go in, and they go into this cave and set up chairs and stuff, and they actually record in there because the sound, the acoustics are so incredible. Well, when we were going in there, the tour guide said, well, this is a special cave. Anyway, same thing, brought down the boom box, put it down. And the caller that I was with, Scott Slocum was his name, who I think has since retired, but he and I called, just harmonized and called with the music, and the sound in there was, no microphones. The sound was perfect.
And a cave, man, that's fantastic. A cave.
So it was pretty special.
It's outstanding. As far as square dancing goes, I kind of know where you are with the music and all that. If it's not square dancing, favorite music genre, what are you listening to?
Boy, Charlie, I like some of the new modern people that are out there recording. I like Justin Timberlake. I like Jason Mraz. I like Ed Sheeran.
Ed Sheeran. I'm a fan of that.
Yeah, I love country. I love older country. I love rock and roll. So I listen to a little bit of all of it. It just depends on what I've got. We've got some recent music now. We just had a brand new Jason Mraz song that has been put out by Shauna Carey on Chic label, and it's you can hear it on the radio, and we've got that song for our computers right now. We can be singing it, and it's about dancing, and I feel like dancing. And when you got a song about dancing, and I recorded one for Wade several years ago that was a Justin Timberlake song about dancing. Mm-hmm. And again, when we're playing music that you hear on the radio, and particularly younger people can hear on the radio, I think we've got the ability with that new music, some of our old country music, all of this music that we have, this variety, to provide a really neat variety for our dancers.
Absolutely. On that note, there's one that I still haven't purchased. I want to, and I don't think about it. It's been out for a few years now, and I've heard them do it. It's I'm only one call away.
Right.
And that is it. I heard that at a caller lab at one of the dances that night. They did that, and I knew that song prior to, but I thought that's perfect because we do calls. We are callers. Yeah. And I thought that is perfect for square dance. And every time I go on and I try and buy one or two songs a month from different labels just so I can kind of do my own way, support the practice of it. And at some point I'm going to remember to get that song. But
it's an old Uncle Cracker song that is, they still play it on the radios in that genre. I'd heard Charlie Robertson do it several years ago. He might have been the one that did it on the flip side, but it's a great song. And once again, another song that people can hear, and it really appeals to dancers of all ages. So it's a great tune. Yeah.
That's outstanding.
Great tune.
All right. A little bit more about the square dance calling. For new callers, I consider myself a new caller. Like I say, I got about 10 years in. But somebody who's thinking about it, considering it, new like myself, or even advanced, what are some just lessons that you'd like to pass on to other callers?
Well, I think the first thing is that you never stop learning, and you've got a lot of support from callers that are in the activity right now. There might be a few places where there's not the support. Maybe callers are, feeling insecure or something. But I think most of us realize that in order for us to bring our activity to more people, and this social activity is a neat thing to bring to other people, we need to have newer callers, younger callers. And those of us that started when we were a lot younger really can appreciate being able to help and mentor new callers. And we've got some great great resources now with the knowledge base. Caller Labs knowledge base is a phenomenal resource to learn from. Amazing. And thanks to Barry Clasper, Dottie Welsh, and Chris Jensen, those guys have put together an amazing resource. The starter kit for callers is being simplified a little bit, which I'm a big favor. I think sometimes we try to make calling too hard, where if you can organize it into certain little categories as a caller, particularly for your patter, it's a lot easier to develop as a caller and call patter when you can organize it in certain ways. Your get outs, your get ins, your modules, your flow modules, your theme tips, those kind of things. If you can organize your patter a little bit, you can create an endless variety very quickly. And so there's ways that we can help new callers by making it a little bit simpler and not getting so technical until they really want to get technical down the line. When you go into advanced and challenge, you got to know these definitions. You got to know how the choreography works and the arrangements and the formations and phaser and all those other terms that I think we don't need to give new callers.
Agreed.
That'll come. Know.
Because it can be a little overwhelming sometime. Starting out, like most callers, I had a few guys that would let me go up and do tips. And so I was really comfortable with singing calls, because I'd go learn it. And it's just karaoke for the most part. I'd go learn 1 or 2 records. And, I'd hit those records every time they asked me to come up. And a few of them said, hey, man, you got to start doing some patter. And I'm like, I'm just going to stick with the singing calls for now, because I struggled with patter like most do. There's some that are naturals at it. I talked to some people, Jet Roberts, and, he said he said it's just always been something I could do. And he's phenomenal at it. Probably I'm on top of the game when it comes to pattern.
But you see guys like Jet and Bronk, who probably were mentored by a guy by the name of Dave Stevens. They work at their craft, and you can see Jet pushing 6 sets of checkers around. They work at it, and they're really their expertise comes from a lot of dedication and a lot of work.
I talked to Pat Carnathan, and he told me that he said even tonight, he said if Jet came up to my house this weekend, he said I'd look over and he'd be sitting at my table pushing checkers, saying, "Hey, I just want to work something out," because that's what he does. He just works at it and works at it.
Yeah.
And I've told some people growing up when I started calling. I didn't want to fail. I didn't fail much when I did a singing call because, hey, I can remember this and let's just go. As long as I get on key, I'm good to go. Yeah. And but when I'm calling, then I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I get the corner here? And I don't like struggling. Now I've kind of embraced that now, and I'm comfortable with it. That's when I felt like an actual caller, is when I kind of got a handle on the pattern. I'm certainly not great at it by any means, but I did a dance one night, and I think I missed the corner one night, the whole thing, and I was just like, this is the greatest night I've ever had.
It's interesting you say that, because I think that all of us, as we begin to call, we don't want to fail. We don't want to miss the corner. We don't want to, get them out of sequence and whatever, So I was calling as a young caller, and one of the callers that I got to call with and that wrote books on calling and pattern calling and note services was a caller out this way in California called Bill Peters. And Bill Peters wrote books on pattern calling. I'm calling along with him, and he goes, boy, both my tires are flat. You got it? And I had it, fortunately. But I looked over at him and I thought, my God, even Bill Peters misses his, loses it every once in a while. He said both tires are flat. Can you help me? And so I thought, I can become comfortable with this. And if you learn to laugh at yourself, and tell the dancers. I mean, dancers will make mistakes. Callers make mistakes.
Absolutely.
And so we can go along with that. And I think we're human. And we do the best we can. If we have a good sense of humor about things and we engage with the dancers, and that's one resource that I'm really proud of that's coming out in the knowledge base, is ways for callers to engage with dancers more. And and the Social Connections Committee, which is I'm chairman of that at Caller Lab. We put together a lot of suggestions from all the callers on things that you can say from the microphone that increase interaction with dancers. And I'm excited about that resource going on the knowledge base soon. And we put another resource on there that if you are going to a dance some night, you want to do something fun to increase interaction with your dancers. Okay. There's simple things you can do. Bring a bunch of stickers that and you stand at the front door and you introduce yourself to people that are coming through the front door, and you say, "What's your favorite dessert?" And they say ice cream, and so you write down ice cream and you stick the sticker on them. And the next person says chocolate cake. And anyway, you meet everybody, you put those stickers on there, and sometime during the night you say, "Hey, I want you to find somebody who's got the same dessert you got and dance in that square." So you're mixing people up, you're getting talking about food, and of course they got their favorite dessert sitting there, so it increases the interaction with the dancers, and it just makes a fun thing that you can do simple. And those resources are now on the knowledge base under Social Connections.
Okay. Absolutely, that's a great idea.
It's fun, and I think we're generating more of those resources so that we can share those things with each other to not only have more fun with the dancers, but have fun ourselves too.
Sure, that's one thing that intimidated me early on. I just started a couple of years doing it, the one night party, one night stand, whatever you want to call it. Sure. Because the way I explained it, even in my line of real work where I'm a police officer, I'm out in the public all the time, but I am just not comfortable going up and starting a conversation with a group of people when it comes to square dancing. And so when I would do a dance, I go out, first tip, put the music on, all right, let's square it up, and people come out. I never could understand how I'm going to go to a group of 30 adults and say, all right, we're going to do square dancing, although that's what they hired me for.
Sure.
Now I've got a few under my belt, and probably the funnest things the most fun things I've done in a couple of years is the one night party, so I really look forward to them now. But there's still that first few minutes. I'm just like, well, how am I going to start this thing? But everybody's really welcome on it.
I got to tell you a quick story. When I was younger, I was calling one of those one-time parties, and it was for a Kiwanis group, and it was a pretty big backyard, fairly close to me. And I was calling along. We were having a great time. And the gentleman who owned the house, his neighbor next door, had his head over the fence there, and they were talking. And he motioned for me to come on over. And I walked on over, and he said, "I want to introduce you to my neighbor. This is Roger Miller." And I went, and I looked at him, and sure enough, in the dark, this was Roger Miller. I looked at him and I said, I have several of your songs that are really popular square dance songs right now. And I said, "Would you sing one with me?" And he goes, "My wife doesn't think I'm missing here." And in he comes. I had, as a young caller, my spare mic was a tape recorder mic. And so I gave him my mic. I plugged in my tape recorder mic, and we did the King of the Road.
Oh, stop. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, and I conned him into doing England Swings. England Swings like a pendulum do. And he said, "I don't know the calls," he said, "but I'll just kind of," and he would do his bit stuff. And we sang those two songs, and he looked at me, and goes, "I got to go before my wife starts to miss me," So out he goes. But I left there that night thinking, God, I got to call with Roger Miller.
That is amazing.
Gosh. And it's still to this day, I can't believe that. But you can get into those situations with a one night party or one time party that are pretty different.
That is amazing. That is a great story. Good gracious. Roger Miller.
Yeah.
And that is one of my favorite. I don't do it. I do it as a duet sometimes. But King of the Road, I love that. It's a square dance song. Very nice.
Oh, it's a great tune. Well, this is back when they were on Wagon Wheel, and and they were just good old tunes, but they were current with what was going on right now. And he was almost tickled that we were singing his songs in square dancing, and just a real gem of a guy. And so it was a great memory.
That's a fantastic memory. All right. Now, you said you played baseball and football in high school?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I played football was my big game, and I almost had a chance to go to college and play in college. And I'm not a big guy. I'm about 5'9", but I bulked up in high school to about 200 pounds, and so I was really a solid running back. But I threw out my shoulder, and which I in a game, and I ended up having surgery on the shoulder and a pin put in, so I didn't get my college scholarship, and I really thought I was bummed out by that. But my father kind of said, your life goes along and you're meant to do certain things. And I was calling at the time, so I still got a lot of joy of singing. And
Sure.
he said, and that may be your line. He said, you don't need to beat yourself up in football. And
Sure. Yeah.
he was right. I still have those issues today. Have to have a
Sure.
shoulder.
The wear and tear on it. Sure. Absolutely.
Man. But always enjoyed sports and still do.
Well, good. Well, you're in a great place for it. Los Angeles, California. I mean, well, as far as baseball goes, you couldn't ask for much better with San Diego, Los Angeles, Anaheim. It's amazing out there.
Speaking of which, you had a story that you shared about a caller listening to something else on the radio. I've got one of my mentors that early on just always was there for some advice, was a guy by the name of Arnie Cronenberger. And Arnie Cronenberger was one of the people that formed Caller Lab. And one night he was calling in McDonald's barn, where I learned to dance, to a group of he had a packed hall, and he was a pretty hot caller, and he had an earpiece in there, just an earplug. And I asked him, I went up to him and I said, Arnie, is that like a monitor? Are you listening to music in there? And he says, no, I'm listening to the Dodger game. I said, you're calling and you're listening to the Dodger? And to this day, I can't imagine listening to a ball game.
That is, I try and get as few distractions as I possibly can when I'm standing up in front of a group of people. So I couldn't imagine that.
You're not kidding. You're not kidding. Yeah.
When you go to those smaller halls and you're up there and you've got this, typically a guy, because it's a deeper voice, that's not dancing, and he's decided to stand 3 foot off of your speaker and have a conversation with someone. And, and I'm doing jambalaya, and I'm like, come on, man, I can hear you over me. So that always is in the back of my head. Somebody will come up when they're going to do rounds and they want to talk to me if it's someplace I've never been or whatever. And as soon as I put my mic down, they're right there and they're like, hey, man, I think I saw you. And I'm like, oh, let's just go to the back. Let's go grab something to drink. And I'm just trying to get over there because the caller, she's even quieter. I mean, the queuer's quieter than I am. And she's trying to do it. And you hear this guy go, weren't you in Alabama last week? And I'm like, come on, let's go back here to the ice cream real quick.
Charlie, you hit a solid one on that. That's something that all the callers need to learn. If you don't already know that, get off the stage and get people like that away, so that it's out of respect for the queuer. It's just, and viewers can do the same thing, leave the stage and let that, that noise go away.
I did a podcast a few weeks ago when I recorded it with Christy Williams and her fiance Chuck. And Christy was telling her story. She said she was up calling a dance, 5, 6, 7 squares, whatever it was. And right in the middle of it, this guy who's about 6'3" walks up, gets right up to her nose and goes, "You're doing great," while she's calling. And she was like, well, I appreciate that. You could have waited till I was done here. And she didn't know if it was meant to distract her or what. So,
well, it's good. You've always got those people that come up with you and they're chewing lemons, or they got lemons in their mouth, just to kind of distract you a little bit,
Oh my goodness. All right. So when I was doing my podcast, I've got all the structured stuff. What's your favorite stuff? Oh, I want to do this real quick before we get off the square dance part of it. What level do you call to?
I call to C1.
C1. Okay. So from SSD right up to C1, do you have a favorite call?
Well, I'll tell you, I really don't have a favorite call. More than right now, I am such a fan of SSD, Charlie. Okay. And the reason why is because it has given us a vehicle particularly in plus destination areas around the United States, and even some mainstream destination areas where we only teach one class a year. Now with SSD, and SSD is a meld of a lot of different programs over the years that we've put together finally into a package, and we have the ability again to teach more than one class a year. When I first started teaching square dancing in the 60s, I always taught 2 classes a year, and we had an activity that was booming. But when we started teaching 1 class a year, because it took us that long to teach, we not only lost more people during the whole process because people were thinking this is way too complicated, but we now have a program that we can open up our doors more than once a year. So I'm a huge fan. I think it's the key to us going forward. Just don't make it so difficult. I mean, there's lots of things you can do to SSD to really add some flavor and spice and keep it going. But at the same time, you put the wind in their face and have a good time with them and entertain them, and we'll grow this activity. So I'm a big fan. And my wife and I dance C1, and I love the puzzle part of it. But I think we need to get away from the puzzle for our new dancers and just allow them to enjoy it. And then if they want the puzzle down the line, that's fine. But get them in there.
I've talked to a lot of people that, and and even if it's a caller or a dancer, if they say, well, even just mainstream, some people, I've gone to places where they're just like, I only dance plus. And, and I thought, well, are you too good for mainstream? Is that what that means? And then you'll get people say, it's mainstream's boring, or SSD's boring, or, I only dance A's and C's. And I thought, that's probably 80% your caller as opposed to the level of dance. Because if you have a caller that can make SSD challenging for you or enjoyable, same thing with mainstream. And I would prefer to call mainstream. I only call up to plus, but mainstream for me is quick. It's thinking, what's next when I'm just citing. Sure. I tell people, I get in them and people, hey, let's do plus. And I'm like, all right, relay the deucey. All right, spin chain, exchange the gears. And, and the music's playing. And I'm like, I'm not even calling now so it's fun for the dancers. They get to dance. They don't have to hear me. But I like mainstream, and you can be creative. And I've danced to a lot of callers such as yourself and all that who can make SSD or mainstream extremely fun, challenging, not in a bad way, but interesting. I danced 6-8 months ago. Tony Oxendown was down in Macon, Georgia. And so I went down there, and my wife and I danced to him, and I hadn't just danced to one of his dances in a long time. And just his mainstream stuff with his separate, come around to the head. And I thought, this is what I need to sound like. And it's just mainstream, but it's just so creative. So when a dancer says, I'm bored, you can put that on maybe his caller. Now, it may not be the caller, but I think in my mind, being a caller, I think it is. If you're more creative, you can make mainstream whatever level good and enjoyable. So.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. The other thing is that there's an attitude that you can teach your dancers that no matter where they're dancing, and whether they're dancing with new dancers or an inexperienced dancer, part of the fun in dancing is the challenge of working together as a unit and making it work with your team. I mean, there's always going to be a weak link here and there. That's okay. We help each other. And if you enjoy the people that you dance with, you're going to have a good time. Sure. I see the dancers in Japan challenge dancers and challenge callers will be in the new dancer hall helping the new dancers. Wow. It's an attitude that they don't have to be dancing challenge or advanced all the time. They enjoy being with the people and helping the people and mentoring new dancers along into the activity. And I think if we're kind to each other, we respect each other and have a good time just being together and moving the music, it doesn't matter what program you dance. But you're Absolutely. Right, course can have a big handle in making it entertaining and fun.
Yeah, it's as much a dance as it is a show when somebody pulls you in. Yeah, so you have to be in. You are an entertainer. That's what it comes down to, or what I think. All right, we'll step off of the square dance for a minute, and I'll throw these out. If you have an opinion on them, let me know. Footloose or dirty dancing, and why?
Footloose or dirty dancing? Footloose. I think we need to be we need to have fun. We need to have and different dancers express themselves in different ways individually. And I think we need to embrace that as callers instead of fighting it all the time. We have some styling issues that we're going to need to resolve coming up in the next couple of years, but I think we need to enjoy dancers' individuality and just let them enjoy being out there. If we call square through too many times, they're going to be sitting up there clapping and hand blah blah and not doing square through, kind of thing. It's because we call square through too much. Hit square through, side square through. They're going to make up games to entertain themselves. Rather than get mad, let them be footloose and enjoy it, and just take it upon ourselves. Well, let's make it a little bit more interesting for them.
Okay.
It goes back
All
to
right,
us.
now I should have opened that with the movies.
Oh, Footloose. The movies.
I loved your wait a minute. Let me say this. I loved your Footloose explanation, and it's fantastic.
Well, that's as far as scoring, but the movie Footloose. I like the music, the dancing,
absolutely, yep. And I've had a few different answers on that. Some Dirty Dancing, and I told them, of course, I love both. That's why I picked those, and they're both dancing movies. Big fan of Kevin Bacon, even bigger fan of Patrick Swayze, but I think Footloose was '84. I graduated high school in '85, so it just hit when I was right at that age.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, where's this town that doesn't have dance? I want to go find this place. But, so I'm a big Footloose fan. So, okay. Braveheart or Gladiator?
Braveheart or Gladiator? Huh. They're both really similar type movies. And it's been so long since I've seen either one of them that I would say, it's I'd say Braveheart.
Okay, I agree. Let's see. You consider yourself a TV or movie guy, or neither?
Well, I don't get a chance to watch a lot of TV, just because I have a busy dental practice, and I also call, and so I don't. I love movie night with my wife. And so I like the movies.
Fantastic. Okay. And now, have you been in California your whole life?
I've lived in California. My parents were born here. My dad grew up in Hollywood, my mother in Santa Monica. And so I'm a native here. I love traveling. I went to school in New Mexico. The interesting thing about New Mexico State University was that there were 9 guys for every girl, and half the girls chewed tobacco. So I thought when I got there and I did my year there, I thought, I'm heading back to California. And my first class in California at San Diego State was water skiing on Mission Bay. So at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm water skiing on Mission Bay and thinking, man, I'm home. this is the place. So I love California because I think we have one of the most fabulous coasts in the world, right here from San Diego all the way to Vancouver.
Absolutely.
So I love California, love traveling. I always love getting back into LAX and smelling the ocean.
That was my next thing. If you could choose beach, mountains, deserts, or plains, where would you want to live?
Beach.
Absolutely. Okay. Gotcha.
I surfed a lot as a kid. I was driving to the beach one day and I found an old surfboard on the side of the road on Malibu Canyon Road, and I stopped and I picked it up. I took it home. I put a skag on it. I refiberglassed it. I've surfed all the way through high school with that surfboard. And the last time I left the beach, when I was heading off to college, to New Mexico. My surfboard was pretty beat up, and it flew off my car and landed someplace on the side of the road. And I didn't even look back. I thought, I'm going to leave it there for the next guy to pick up and fix. And so that was the end of my surfing in high school, and I've done a little bit since that time. But so I love surfing. There was no doubt about that.
Wow. Okay, that's great. You're going to be in Alabama next month.
Next month,
National Convention.
Yeah, we're gonna. You can't quite fly into Mobile very easy, so we're flying into New Orleans, and Nolans and driving to the national.
I'm
Yes.
trying to think. I think Buddy said they may be flying into New Orleans too, because they've got to drive.
Yeah.
Up, get a rental car. Luckily, I think it's about 2.5 hours for me, so I'm going to get to drive to that one. I've flown to the last 3, but so I'm looking forward to that.
Nice. It'll be good to see you there.
Yep, absolutely good to see you. And now, what do you have coming up other than that? Any cruises, any weekends, or anything you want to put out there?
Charlie, we just took 90 dancers to Costa Rica, and
That's right. Okay.
had a great trip there.
Okay.
And,
I saw some of the videos. That was Teresa was with y'all, yes?
Hi, Teresa Berger,
Yep.
Adam Chrisman
Yep.
out of the Washington Spokane area, Wade Driver, Dee Dee Doherty, Jerry Gilbreth, and KO Jeans out of Texas.
Okay, I didn't realize you were out there. Yeah, I saw several of the videos. I follow Teresa pretty closely, and I saw some of the stuff she was putting up. So that was a good time.
We had a great time. We're going back next year. So
okay.
At the end of this year, we're going to Hawaii. We got a group of dancers going to Hawaii with Buddy and Ken Bauer and Jerry Gilbreth and Gary Shoemake, hopefully, and so we're looking forward to heading to Hawaii at the end of the year. Got a group going there.
Yeah, I will say that I don't want to. Like I said, I just recorded Buddy last night, and he brought up the Hawaii trip. I didn't realize that most of he was born and basically grew up there. I had no idea. And he even brought that up. He said he likes to take people and show them his Hawaii, and not what the tourists see and all that. And so I was like, man, I think I'm going to have to go next year to that then. I can't go this year, but I'm going to go next year. So I had no idea. I thought he just was like born there and moved over. But I learned a lot from that guy.
I'm looking forward to it. I've traveled with Buddy. I've called with him in Japan. Mm-hmm. He really enjoys the people there too, and I'm looking forward to going to Hawaii with him because I know we'll get to see a side of Hawaii that
sure.
I haven't seen.
That sounds like a great time. Well, Mike, I appreciate you doing this, buddy. We get to talk a little at Caller Lab, and like I say, once I get past Alabama, most of you guys I only see at a convention or a Caller Lab, and so our time together is short when we can have a conversation or sit down and have a meal every now and then. But it is my true pleasure to talk to you tonight. You are an ambassador of square dancing. I will tell you that. Even though we don't get to see each other face to face, I learn a lot from all of y'all and you just from watching a YouTube video that you might put up or somebody else puts up of you. And so, man, I appreciate what you do. Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate what you do, and I'm glad you're teaching classes, and because I love that part of the activity, and it's a process. We become better and better as we do it.
That's one thing I was really it's taken me. Like I say, I just got a club in January. I started with a club in Calhoun, Georgia, which is about 50 miles north of where I live, and after they started want to do classes, and we're doing the SSD program, was what I'm teaching. And all the caller schools I went to prior to this year when I had my own club, they said, Charlie, you will get better if you keep doing this, but you've got to teach. You've got to teach. If you teach, you are going to learn more than the students ever will learn as far as calling. And I believed them, and that was coming from some really big-time callers. And but I see it now because I think we're 12, 11 weeks in. And so we're getting pretty deep into it. And I see it now. There's a lot of stuff I see when I'm calling. I'm like, oh, okay, I've seen that before. And so I'm learning as I go.
I think it's all a process. Again, you never stop learning. And I think it's fun to share ideas about teaching. That's what Caller Lab's about. We share a lot of those things. And so listening to the sessions on teaching and are helpful. Sometimes if you just want to tip on something, it's fun to call another caller. And all of us have mentors and people that we and friends and colleagues that we call and say, how would you handle that? And I think that's the kind of interaction that we need to do more of because it helps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mike, it's been a pleasure, brother. If we don't get the chance to talk before, I will see you in Alabama.
Looking forward to the national.
So absolutely, we'll spend a little bit of time together. It's good seeing you, man. Glad you're doing well, and I will talk to you soon.
Hey, thank you very much, and enjoy it, and keep these casts going. It's fun having callers talking.
Absolutely. I want to do this for the rest of the time that I'm walking on this planet. So we'll see how that goes.
You got it. You got it,
brother. We'll talk to you soon. See you, Mike.
You take care. Okay. All righty.